Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy so that it isn't just name-calling anymore. And we see this too much on television and in the printed commentariat as well. And healthcare has been and continues to be one of those issues that we seem to all grapple with the idea that it is a problem. Access is there, but the costs become a barrier to that access. And here is joining us now from the Capital Research Center, one of our favorite organizations, capitalresearch.org, Michael Watson, Research Director. Michael, welcome back to the show. You've got a great piece on the healthcare and what's going on in it. How are you doing this week? And thank you for joining us.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. So
the piece, Commonwealth Fund Prescription for Public Health, More Federal Control, because that always seems to help, doesn't it? That's always the thing that's going to save us the best, isn't it?
There's certainly people who believe that, yes.
Yes, it is. So take us into what the Commonwealth Fund is trying to do here in the Commonwealth. And again, you can find this article at Capital Research. But when the Commonwealth Fund is purported to Virginians, it is more just Obamacare redistribution, isn't it?
Yeah, so Commonwealth Fund actually isn't based in any state that calls itself a Commonwealth. It's a New York-based, big liberal foundation established the better part of 100, in fact, more than 100 years ago. And in its beginning, it gave money to public hospitals, but in recent decades, it has been a leading edge of the supporting the advocacy for increased government control of the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. So when Obamacare passed in 2009-10, they were deeply involved and took a lot of public credit for having developed not only helped develop the the individual mandate and other mm-hmm. sorts of policies, but also in generating research that showed the supposed need for a more government control of the healthcare system.
Yeah, and that was the key part. I mean, really, is first it had to prove, and this goes into almost the thing we've been seeing more and more is scientism. Tell me what answer you want, and then I'll come up with the research that says, look, here's the problem.
Well, right. I mean, they put out every couple of years this report that's supposed to show that the American healthcare system is the worst in the world, or at least the worst among the major developed economies. Mm-hmm. A lot of criticism for how they came up with that result, and some might suggest that the methodology, the methodology that they used was sort of designed to favor like Britain's National Health Service, which, I mean, you open a British newspaper and there's, they love the National Health Service for ideological reasons, but they have so many practical problems with it.
Yeah, we love everything about it except it.
Yeah. They very much love the idea of the in practice, they have some problems. And, but Commonwealth Fund's surveys, would show the British health system to be better than ours. And again, that causes one to ask the question, has this methodology been designed to produce a result?
Mm-hmm. Well, and we see this so frequently because they have to, in a country like ours, unlike Britain, where they can just say this is for the greater good. And, for the most part, people will just say, if the king says so, I guess so. But here, they need our popular support because there are Congress people who can't traffic in the taxpayer money to their K Street friends if they lose their next election. So they have to create that belief that we need this. What did they do to start this? Because you'd see the stories and you'd hear the plaints, and you wondered, are the statistics backing it up, or is it just another instance where 5% of the population is getting 95% of the coverage?
Hard to say, but what's interesting is that now that Obamacare is the law and has survived 2 years of a Republican-controlled federal government, now they're moving on, and in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, they're moving on to this, they're moving on to trying to build up the public health system, and that is also going to be, they want it to be based on even more federal control, even more federal coordination, even after federal government and state governments hardly crowned themselves in glory over the past 2 years.
Well, when you see the most recent, and I forget what the catchy name for the $1 trillion spending plan had, the most recent one had a big bailout, for lack of a better term, for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act again. And I believe that's at least the second time the federal government's had to come in and bail out something that they've said everyone loves and is working so great.
Yeah, no, the Obamacare system just has not delivered what was promised in so many ways.
So who is behind this Commonwealth Fund? Because I know my listeners, their first reaction is, oh, here comes Soros again, or there you go, Joe, seeing George Soros in the shadows again, depending on which proclivity they have. So you mentioned, and I guess when they chose the word Commonwealth, they meant, everyone's money is ours to give out to everyone else. So when they set up groups like this, who's really back there behind it? Is it an insurance cabal? Is it a healthcare cabal of big?
It is probably neither. It is someone who died long ago. A lot of liberal philanthropies, ironic, this is one of the great ironies. A lot of big liberal philanthropies come out of Standard Oil money, like John D. Rockefeller. Yeah. Oh, the whole Rockefeller philanthropy empire, and one of the Standard Oil investors was a guy by the name of Stephen Harkness, and he, when he died, and then his widow lived for a little while, and then his widow set up the Commonwealth Fund in 1918. So again, over 100 years ago. Wow. And the way that these foundations work, these sort of traditional, we call it here at CRC sometimes big philanthropy. The way that big philanthropy works is, these old rich people, they pass away, or as they're preparing to pass away, they create these foundations of perpetual existence, and they're going to live long after the founder has passed away. And whatever the initial intention, over time, the institutional nonprofit world, which is unsurprisingly liberal and increasingly liberal. So even if you're a liberal by 1918 standards, by 1965, your money is being controlled by people who are liberal by 1965 standards. By 2022, it's being controlled by people who are liberal progressive by 2022 standards. And so all the while, the endowment of these foundations is continually growing. I mean, the classic example is the Ford Foundation, because there you can actually trace an ideological shift.
Interesting.
Obviously, it's Henry Ford's money, the Ford, his immediate descendants, big capitalists, over a 50 to 70 year period, it becomes one of the, basically the, George Soros's Open Society Foundations, the Ford Foundation, and then there are a couple of the more new Silicon Valley donors, and that's
Center for Civic Trust and stuff like that.
Yeah. Center for Tech and Civic Life, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
And then those are some sort of the three pillars, other than organized labor and the trial bar, that form the support structure for the institutional left. So yeah, Commonwealth Fund is maybe not the biggest of big philanthropy, but it's got the better part of $1 billion in assets that it can use to fund, any sort of liberal healthcare advocacy.
Michael Watson was on with us from Capital Research Center, capitalresearch.org, and we'll make sure you get a copy of this story because it is a great look at how, what did you call it, Michael? Big philanthropy, and we hear about big pharma and big oil, and sometimes, like so often, these funds are set up as investment or divestment vehicles so that the sons and daughters of these industrialists can still be wealthy without having to pay the taxes, but then they wind up getting taken over 2 or 3 generations later by these ideological bents because they see money there. I mean, it's what is the old saying about the bank robber? Why'd you rob the bank? Because that's where the money is, and it gets
there's a class element to it too. There is a professional managerial class, especially in the nonprofit world, and that professional managerial class shares a set largely of ideological predispositions, and they are overwhelmingly on the left.
Right.
So, this is how you end up with, and I haven't done too much research into the sort of founding of Commonwealth Fund, so I can't say whether there's an ideological shift there. But at somewhere like the Ford Foundation, this is how the ideological shift happens. As the founder passes on, the second generation gets involved. Friends and managerial staff are now on the board, and over time, that professional managerial impulse sort of takes over these institutions and moves them in the direction of supporting progressivism.
Well, is it also almost understandable, and I don't want to use that too loosely of a term, Michael, but when your career is running this organization, this big philanthropy, of course it's going to become your logical response that the big philanthropy is really the only answer. I've often said I really appreciate nonprofits whose goal is to put themselves out of business, but these philanthropies often are not that case at all. They're here to be self-perpetuating. They get bigger. They are very profitable investment firms.
That's absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. If you are part of these big philanthropies, finding more work for yourself is definitely an impulse, definitely part of the incentive structure.
A friend of my father's started a philanthropy like this, a very small, we had several, $1 billion in it, and he was funding universities in Ireland back in the 80s and 90s. He had made a ton of money in duty-free shops. And part of the story that was written about him was that after divesting all this money into the university systems in Ireland, he turned around and his manager said, yeah, we have more money than we did last year because the investments just grew and they were good at what they did. And I guess that's one of the things, even if you try to give away all the money, if it's managed correctly, there's going to be more money at the end of it.
That can happen.
Yeah. So what are they doing right now at the Commonwealth Fund as it relates to, as you mentioned, the scientism. They were good at it during the development of Obamacare. Are we getting more of that now? Because I look at what we're hearing regarding, especially healthcare with COVID and everything else. Is this back with a vengeance? Because I worry that we have a derby between climate change and gun violence as the next critical healthcare crisis that will give governors and administrators dictatorial powers over the marketplace and Main Street and our own homes.
Yeah, so Commonwealth Fund convened this commission on the national public health system, and it put out its report a couple months ago. Got the write-up in the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And what the New York Times basically summarized the report, and from what I read of the report, I'd say it's pretty accurate. This Blue Ribbon Commission, which has all the usual people you have on these Blue Ribbon Commissions, you have, former FDA commissioner. The chair was the former FDA commissioner for Barack Obama. Also on it was the president of the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion advocacy group. A bunch of health officials from various state and local Democratic administrations. Obviously, of course, it had, one person from the George W. Bush administration and one person who used to work for Rick Perry when he was governor of Texas, but
so they can say,
not right. Yeah. Not people who would, people who might be or have been Republican at one point in their lives, but not people you would say are, sort of committed to providing an alternate values perspective. Mm-hmm. They come down and say that what we need is more federal control of pandemic response, rather than the state by state approach that we had. Not that the state by state approach was great.
But you had Florida's and Texas,
right? But you had Florida's, Texas's, Georgia's that could weigh the costs and benefits of various approaches differently than a New York or a California, or a Virginia or a Maryland. Mm-hmm. And what is, I think, most revealing in the report is the section that the report authors put out on how public health agencies should work to earn the public's trust. And while they were very clear in acknowledging why ethnic minority communities, especially the Black community, might distrust public health advice because of some of the history of unethical medical experimentation, there wasn't any consideration of why they recognize that rural and conservative areas are now also mistrusting in public health, but there's no recognition as to why that might be justified. It was all, it's just misinformation. Did they discuss? I mean, I don't know if you remember when the George Floyd demonstrations occurred. This was at some of the, there were limits on how many people you could have at a gathering for any purpose. And yet, all these public health scholars signed this open letter saying that actually, no, this is fine.
Yeah, no, I remember that. That was one of the real gobsmacking moments, and the press just sort of let that slide by. Right.
And, there you had some of the public, you had the famous cases of public officials who were either appearing to violate or going against their own advice, or even, or going out, they would go out to dinner the night before the restaurants would be closed.
Yep. Gavin Newsom being famous amongst those.
I remember there was a Los Angeles official who went out to dinner the night before they were going to close indoor dining.
Right.
And then you had, the admitted by most prominently Dr. Anthony Fauci of the NIH, that he said that he was changing what he the advice he was giving based on what he thought the public could hear that would get them to do what he wanted, regarding herd immunity. And obviously his, back and forth on masks. But, Commonwealth Fund's report, at least, did not address that these violations, it's interesting that we're discussing this the week that after Queen Elizabeth II died, because that's the way the British aristocracy, including the royal family, behaved during World War II. King George VI, then Princess Elizabeth, they were very firm to the extent that they could, given their station, abiding by as many of the strictures of the war as they could. Mm-hmm. I mean, Elizabeth herself, late in the war, when she had turned 18, joined the military, joined the auxiliary, the women's auxiliary of the British Army.
Yeah, she was working training in a motor pool or something like that.
Yeah, she was training as an ambulance driver, and if the war had gone into 46, might have been sent to Europe. Right. So they made very clear that we the ruling class are in this with you, and the king and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, stayed in London during the Blitz.
Sure.
Compare that ethic to the ethic of some of our leadership that people saw during the pandemic, and that's part of why you got mistrust. And there's at least Commonwealth Fund's report didn't make that recognition.
Well, and when you get government control, you get ridiculous things like Senate and House resolutions on this that exempt them from the same restrictions they were putting on the people. And then they shrug them off saying, well, somebody needs to do it, while they tell you can't go to church, but you can go to the liquor store. You can't vote in person, but you can go to Walmart. I mean, these were so discordant. They
have to close off the seeds aisle.
Right.
In one state, I think it was Michigan that did that.
The home improvement centers. So why do these funds? I mean, are they getting their support? Obviously, they begin as this sort of trust fund. Here's all the money. We don't want to look impolite for having so much money, so we're setting up this nonprofit, Michael. But what is the goal now? Are they really just trying to help and we saw in Obamacare, the insurance companies became the winners because you had a law that said you were going to be punished if you didn't buy insurance, and the insurance company said, yeah, we're fine with that, and that kind of thing. Who is benefiting from this kind of stuff?
I think the people see us with the case of the public health advocacy by Commonwealth Fund. I think it's the people C.S. Lewis called omnipotent moral busybodies. It's an ideological. The public health establishment has for some time had an implicit code of values that holds physical health constrained by left progressive politics to be the highest good. Mm-hmm. That's what public policy, a healthcare system, public health management should aspire to.
But nobody, this was always the frustrating thing under Obamacare. There weren't actual people being denied health care. That was the thing that always puzzled me, is the narrative that they would sell, Michael, was that people were being denied health care when that was actually against the law. And if there was a hospital denying somebody health care, somebody should have been going to prison for it, but nobody ever raised that question.
I mean, it's and that's where you get that constrained by left progressive politics. There's the beliefs about, depending on the year, equality or equity as it is currently, defined in the liberal mind. Meanwhile, again, you have the public that is increasingly seeing that is what that there's that implicit code of values, and that they have different ones, and that they weigh the costs and benefits differently. And that's, again, I think, why you got New York and California behaving in the way New York and California behaved, and why you had Florida and Georgia behaving the way Florida and Georgia behaved.
How much of this has captured our public policy? Certainly, we have a House and Senate that are led by the progressive left, and a president that's pretty much willing to sign anything as long as it keeps him from getting harangued by AOC and Bernie Sanders. What's next for these folks in your view, Michael?
Very hard to say. A big blue ribbon commission sometimes can drive conversation in Washington and can drive conversation in policy advocacy, or sometimes it just, it's the tree, the proverbial tree that fell in a forest and nobody was there to hear it.
Right.
The point of optimism would be that the public is exhausted by these sorts of measures, and that, obviously we, live. The people are the ultimate font of sovereignty and the ultimate font of authority. And that may constrain the ability of groups like Commonwealth Fund to gain that increased federal control that they're looking for. But then again, they do have a receptive audience, at least ideologically in theory, in Congress and the Biden administration. So it's really hard to say.
With the midterms coming up, Michael Watson on with us. Just last one for you, and I'm not asking you to talk about midterms in terms of politics, but when President Trump said, "Okay, great, you voted for repeal of Obamacare a dozen times, send me one and I'll sign it," and they couldn't do it all of a sudden, is this something that the citizens need to be asking these erstwhile midterm office seekers?
It's hard to say. Capital Research Center is a 501c3, so we don't really do.
Oh yeah. I understand.
Yeah. But what I will say is that legislators and policymakers, when they know that a legislation is going to be vetoed, or they know it's going to be filibustered in the Senate, or they know that a court is going to block its enforcement, they are willing to make much firmer statements on issues when they know there will be no consequences.
Yeah,
no real world consequences.
Yes, we've seen it. Hey, Michael,
go ahead. And when there are real world consequences, they tend to be more hesitant.
Absolutely. It's capitalresearch.org. Michael Watson, thank you so much for this look inside the Commonwealth Fund and what it's doing behind the scenes there. And we appreciate it. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next, Caleb Taylor, Director of Policy for the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, on Virginia and California and why we have joined in these compacts with them. Next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.